just go and hang in there. Hang in that discomfort. Because that will bring the fruit that you actually want. And in that discomfort, there's fear, there's uncertainty, there's not knowing, and there's also that freedom. It's the bushes, like the side of the road. It's this, it's this meandering, but holding on. And I think that process has taught me that and continues to teach me that it's hanging on or hanging in that discomfort allows me then to sort of slowly move forward.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the How Change Changes You podcast. I am very excited to be talking to Anita, and I'm going to be honest here because Anita and I had recorded this previously, but the universe decided that it didn't want to record for whatever reason. So this is actually take two. And because Anita is such a beautiful person, she just said, it's no problem. It's no problem. So we're hoping that everything works this time round. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to you, Anita, to introduce yourself to everyone that's listening and watching. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do?
Yes. Well, it's a lovely introduction, and I'm excited for take two and what will come out of it, right?
Yeah.
So my name is Anita Joos Eyre. I grew up in Switzerland, and that's where I live right now. I spent about 20 years in the United States. And 8 years ago, we moved back with my husband and our daughter. And we're in Switzerland now. I'm a transition and leadership coach. I got trained a few years back, and that's what I do now, part-time as I'm a full-time parent and a part-time coach. And that's what I do. And what I really love and what makes, my sort of like what everything opens up is nature and the mountains. And the privilege that I have is that I live really close to mountains. And so very happy, to be stepping into that all the time.
Yeah, no, we were just talking, weren't we, earlier, just the power of nature and just being so close to it. For me, I'm very close to a sea, to the North Sea here, and it's a tonic for the soul. So being out in the mountains or the woods or by the sea, it's just got healing properties. So totally. And Anita and I connected very early on in your early stages of finding a coaching school, didn't we? So again, I think synchronicities, like energy attracts like energy. And, it's been so beautiful to kind of watch then your journey and to connect again and again over the years and see how that's gone for you. So thank you for coming on for take two.
Well, thank you. And, you've been instrumental in this change story that we're going to talk about as well today. And just the interaction with you really shifted a lot of things in me. And so I'm really grateful that the friendship has stayed through this time and that I'm here today.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, that's a perfect segue into you introducing your change story, which I'm sure so many women will be able to resonate with this transitionary change story. So set the scene. Where are we starting from your change story?
Yeah, the scene started, I would say, 2017, 2018, sort of. That's when it all started. The catalyst for this was that our daughter at this time started first grade. And I had, up until that time, I decided to stay home and be there for our daughter and raise her and spend my time that way. I had a long history before in the US working. In fact, I was working in New York City at a fun job back in the day. I was a global media director for luxury fashion brands and placed media worldwide, which was a lot of fun. And New York was a lot of fun. But then when our daughter was born, I decided that I wanted to make a switch and definitely be there for her. And I would not change that decision at all, but every decision brings, you know, pros and cons. And one of the things was that when she started grade 1, I was like, now what? I have all this extra time that's coming my way, and what do I want to do now? And I started to sort of look at of like what I had done before and what I wanted to do at that point in my life. And I knew I didn't want to go back to my old life in media placement and buying. One was that I live in Switzerland now, and Switzerland is not New York City, so that's one story. But it also was that I knew the way I had evolved that I didn't want to step fully back into that and do that. And so then the question sort of arose, like, what do I do now? And it sort of just took its time, like every transition, and you and I have spoken about this too, it just takes its time, and what the things that sort of bubble up, and it sort of moved into, you know, COVID time as well. But before COVID, it was even like 2019, the end of it, I had this sense of just like, almost like this lack of purpose in my life. Now, from outside, one may say, well, what do you mean lack of purpose? You're a mother, you're, you know, you have all these different roles in your life. And that was all there, and that was all beautiful. And it wasn't, you know, that was all great. But there was a purpose out about who I was and what I wanted to do when I still had hopefully half of my life still ahead of me, right? And so the questions then really rose, what do I really want? And it threw me first in a little bit of a hole because I didn't have an answer. And I see this now in my coaching often, this step where it's like, I don't know. And it almost steps into this depressive state of like, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. Am I really good at anything? What can I bring to the table? Where do I reinvent myself? And all the fears that come in and so forth. And so then this was sort of happening, you know, through a few months, you know, I don't remember exactly because I never timed the beginning or the end, but it just took some time, right? And then COVID happened, and COVID was really interesting to me because with all that we know about COVID, one wouldn't say this is necessarily a good time for the world. But it was interesting for me that the day that the world shut down in mid-March, I got a distinct feeling this is going to be really good for you to get clear on what you want. I still didn't know what I wanted, but it just that sense. And so because COVID, everything slowed down, I got a chance to just allow this space within me get much bigger. And that's where it came sort of this, well, who am I? What do I want to do? And I realized that what I love the most are deep conversations. That's what I had with friends. What I love to read are books on self-development. So then it came like, well, what do I want to do now with that, right? It's like, okay, I have these loose ends. I started thinking about, is it psychology? Do I want to go into that? And it wasn't it for a variety of reasons. And then coaching sort of surfaced. And I have to say, I came in it, I hadn't, you know, I had a lot of experience of coaching or having been coached. And then that's where you and I met. As I started to look of like, okay, what does that mean then? That's when I started looking around, and you and I had a conversation about both of the schools that we went to, which is IPEC, and looking at like, is this for me or is it not? And I will never forget the moment, I think you were in Italy, you were visiting your friend, and we were, you know, on the phone, and you were answering all these questions. And my question to you is like, well, what is this coaching really like? And you're like, well, I can coach you right now, which I still loved. You were just like, boom. And I just remember coming off that call and I was going, holy smokes, what just happened here? It was really, it really sunk in. And so then that's when I, you know, signed up to attend IPEC, and my whole world just changed, you know, from not knowing what to do, stepping into something and feeling like this is exactly what I want to do. So, and that's where I'm now, a coach.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the waves of change that brings. And it's of no surprise now that you're helping people through transitions and leadership, that being of others, but also of self, right? Because I think, you know, and it's resonating. I know we were talking just earlier before we started recording, that we're always in some kind of transition, but some transitions are bigger than others. And I think so many people watching can very much identify with those that have had children, that have moved countries or moved locations, of actually how much your identity gets wrapped up in your career, or being a mother, becoming a mother, or your child reaching that quite pivotal stage of first grade. It's like almost like that's, you know, where they need you a little less than they did before. So I think the way in which you're reflecting on it is beautiful, because it highlights how much we panic, I guess, from not knowing. Like, the not knowing it's got such a negative connotation, hasn't it? Of like, well, I should always know. And we don't allow ourselves not to know. So the biggest thing for me from what you share is the slight change there is allowing yourself the space. And kind of COVID was that for you, it sounded like. Just actually all of the other distractions could kind of fall away, and then you could just sit in the question and have it come up through you and find those ingredients. How did you go about then finding those ingredients when you said that you identified, well, hold on, what is I love? Like, can you talk a little bit around how you started that process?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question that somebody asked, and I don't remember like where it originated, but it's sort of like, what do you love doing the most when you have nothing to do? And that's the question I just let simmer sort of around me or in me. And it was this question of like paying attention of where I thrive, where I come away and go, that was great. That was a lovely day. Or this was, you know, and so yeah, it is starting to pay attention of what I love the most. And I think this is something often, like when you were talking about transitions and how many we have, it is starting to pay attention of what is happening within us. Because we're so, like, just like how you said, we're so quick at going like, well, yeah, but, you know, and sort of moving on and moving past this or moving forward and not being comfortable in this unknown. And I think our society teaches us. I mean, I have an 11-year-old daughter right now who already has to figure out what is her next step. She already should know where she wants to go. You know, is she going school-wise? And I'm like, oh my goodness, we're starting that early. No wonder we are all highly uncomfortable with not knowing. And so, yes, it's listening more and paying attention of what's going on. Why do we thrive? What are we good at? What do we enjoy? Where do we feel at ease? And there's different questions for different situations, but in mine it was that in determining what I wanted to do career-wise.
And it sounds like it was more of a feeling than because I think we can automatically as well go to a bit of a logical place. What was that like in terms of asking yourself from a perspective of what, you know, how do I feel when I thrive, as opposed to, oh, well, you know, what was the interplay there, I guess, is the question, between the logic and the feeling?
That's a very good point, because, you know, when I had those questions, there was not a logical answer that came back. Oh, well, you must be a coach then. There was no logical answer at all.
No.
It was just, it's pieces that came together. I love this. Well, okay, what do I do with this now? Okay, so I love deep conversations. Okay, all right, I don't know yet. Okay, next thing, this is what I love reading. Oh, okay, so now we have two things that kind of go together. And then it's like, okay, oh, I see some interesting people that I really like what they're doing. Oh, they talk about coaching. Okay, well, so what is that? Okay, then, okay, now I'm having a conversation with somebody else. And so it's following that feeling, and piece by piece that comes together, because we have a tendency to want to know immediately the end goal, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what to do. I will become a coach. Well, that certainly wasn't the case. It's
Mm,
step by step,
mm, mm, mm.
trusting what's coming, and this sense of like, okay, I'm going to follow this now a little bit further. And then I followed it a little bit further and a little bit further. And that didn't mean that all was smooth, like there was hiccups all the way throughout.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it often goes. It's never linear, right? It's this transitions are just never linear. We're taught they're linear, right? You go from, you get married, then you have children, then you have a house, then no, that's, I mean, yet there are some people that have that, but most of it is just backwards and forwards and
Yeah.
handstand and the whole thing, right?
Yeah. No, and I love that from a perspective of, how we should on ourselves, because I think we look around and the natural thing to do is compare yourself, your situation to where somebody else is. And then from that, we go, I'm behind, I'm ahead, I'm on par. And because it's not linear, that thought process ends up being quite destructive, where you then put additional pressure on yourself, which then heightens probably the anxiety in, I need to know. And if I don't know, then I'm somehow failing. What the way you've described it in that allowing is following the unfolding with curiosity. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the time frame, because it's when we remove the time frame, we are then open to hear what's going on.
Mm.
And when we have this time for, well, and this, I see this with so many people who go through like a transition where they're like, okay, I've done this and now I want to do something else. Like, well, I should have known that at 20.
Yeah.
Why am I here at 40, 50, 60, whatever?
Mm.
You have people at 30 who are like, why didn't I know this then? If there's no time frame, it opens up everything.
Yeah.
And then we can actually listen and be
Yeah.
curious of what's coming up.
Mm.
Instead of this, I should this, I should that, and so forth.
Yeah, because then we miss the point, don't we? We miss almost the learning because we're too busy thinking that it should happen in a certain way. And I love the analogy you gave as well of your daughter being 11, and then at such an age, then, well, you've got to know, you've got to work out the next trajectory of your life. And it's nuts, really, because so many of us in our lifetime, especially the change story that you're sharing specifically, is sometimes, and I think it's increasingly so, that people don't stay in the same career or the same job for a long, long time. Like, there's so many different options, and you find it more often than not, people are pivoting from one type of career to another. And that's okay. So I think we're definitely seeing more of that, but it's interesting that even from school age, it's setting that way of it being linear.
Yeah.
How have you navigated that with your daughter?
Well, with its ups and downs, just like everything else, right? Of even talking to her about thinking of what she really enjoys doing, where, and also knowing you can change and pivot, like you said. And I think we are in today's day and age slowly coming along with the natural way of our being. And that is, we evolve, we transition. So this, what I loved when I was 20 is most likely not what I'm going to love at 50 or at 60. Now it may be, but it's allowing us to go of course I'm evolving myself, and so my interests are changing, and the way I'm supposed to grow is changing. And so that understanding as well, that where we, I sort of compare it with here in Switzerland, they often had in the beginning of the 20th century, it's okay, we're going to get all these rivers that just kind of go everywhere. We're going to make it nice and tight, and then they go, and, and then we realized, wait, all this habitat is going away. And these animals don't have its space. So guess what's happening right now? We're getting smarter. We're going backwards and going, wait, if you just go like, here's the way to go, we're missing out on so much around us and who we are. And it's the same that we're becoming wiser in that and realizing that we're not programmed like that as human beings at all, because we are in constant evolution. Hence, we're in constant transition, which is great, because what else is there to create, and what else do I want to become and be, in my life? What do I want to emulate, and what do I want to be at my very core?
Yeah. I love that analogy so much of the nature element of allowing life to flow, because when we try and make things mechanical, or it's almost like a Roman road, isn't it, from A to B straight, like, not winding.
Yeah.
And it's that piece, isn't it, of really, it's off the beaten track, and it's the way that nature grows and expands. It's in its own natural way. It's not constructed in this very formulaic way. It is actually most of the time random. And I think us as human beings, almost we get that sense of safety from it being predictable. But unfortunately, predictable then kind of takes all of the joy and all of the magic out of things, So I love that analogy that you've given, and being able to, and just the way that you described it, it felt more expansive. It felt more, that sense of awe or wonder, when you are a child and you kind of go like, oh, because again, you've got your imagination, and you're not constrained by time when you're a child, because actually when you're time doesn't exist when you're a child. An hour can feel like a year when you're a child, whereas it can feel like 1 second when you're an adult, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That wonder that's still there. And it's sort of like this unknown that we have. And well, let's say like the predictability that we want and we crave because we think that is safety, sort of detracts us from what's really going inside, because we're setting these limits where it's like, I'm getting more and more and more comfortable with the unknown. I'm more comfortable than I was a couple of years ago, and I will be more comfortable in 2-3 years than I'm now, of allowing what is in me to come out. It's sort of this from the inside out versus the outside in. And we're so conditioned, everything, talk about like profession, spirituality, like roles, it's from the outside in versus the inside out, and what is able to emerge from that and from who we are at our very core, that often we don't even know yet because we piled some stuff on it, starting in childhood.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Trapped.
Yeah. So when you look back at your transition from moving from New York to Switzerland, being a mother, your child then starting to grow, and then you're in this space of, hold on, I've got more time now in my hands. What am I going to do now? And then obviously entering into that discomfort of not knowing. And then as you talk about kind of putting the pieces together, or at least the strands, something you can get hold of and feel like, okay, right, I think I'm getting closer to this puzzle. So it's just then following your instinct, following your feeling. How would you say you managed, so, thinking about the inside out process that you followed, how much of that was inner work and how much influenced you like outside of yourself? I guess for those listening to understand, maybe someone's in that not knowing right now. Yeah. What would you say to them of like what is inside versus what is outside for them navigating this path?
Well, I think it's both. And I think there's this clear distinction that even with my clients, I often speak about. There's part of it is that, let's say, a skill or a behavior, an external thing, learning, in my case, learning to become a coach, right? That's an external factor. And then there's the internal work of understanding of like, how do I deal with this uncertainty? And so if we're looking at any decision that we make, there's often two factors of like, okay, what do I need to do out here? Where do I get external help? Where do I get external clarification? And then what needs to happen within me? Often we do mostly external and very little internal.
Yeah.
But it's almost like there's this it's almost like a hybrid car works. You can have this external and that can work, but on its own it sort of runs out of juice at some point. And if you bring the internal in, if you only go the internal, you're not being in motion. You're just kind of like, well, what do I need to do? And just kind of letting that simmer. But when you put both pieces together, then you're moving forward in a different way that's driven by the internal and the external. And that's when like magic really then happens, when it kind of comes together.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the other reason why I absolutely love talking to you, Anita, because we have a love of metaphor, of using different metaphor, because it helps people understand. And it makes total sense from what you share, because it's an inside job. Like, yes, it's that dance between the inside and the outside. But what I'm hearing fundamentally is, if you're focused on the external, then you're probably more shoulding from a place of logic, a place of, well, I see what people are doing and, oh, they seem to be happy, let's follow them, as opposed to, okay, these are the possibilities. All right, now I've got the external possibilities. Now let's check back in with myself. How do I feel about each of these possibilities? Because the wisdom, often it's seldom here, and it's more here. And for those listening, I am pointing to my body. It's in your heart center, it's in your gut, isn't it? It's this inner knowing, it's your intuition, which a lot of us have in huge amounts when we're young, and then it slowly gets stomped out of us, right? Into, you should know everything and know where you are from 11 years old onwards.
Yeah. Because that's where we put the focus, right? The way our thoughts, that's where we put the focus. When that is so, it's almost like a cloud that can come and go. But it's what happens internally is like there's a different voice that is speaking, that is clearer, but it's harder to hear. The voices outside are so much louder. And so it's this interplay of understanding, not neglecting either one. Both have their space. But it's not neglecting that inner voice that really knows. But it's also a muscle that needs to get trained to listen to that. When we're so often not, it's like I see it, in my daughter's school. It's like clearly trained what she has to do, math and German and all these things. Well, that's an external, and the internal is not schooled almost. That's like what we have to figure out on our own. So it gets also shoved to the side.
Yeah, for sure. No, it makes total sense, right? Because the main thing that I heard you say is almost this inner fuel of when you hit across something that you love, that there's something, it's almost intangible, but it's a fuel, it's a drive, it's a passion, it's you have a reaction to something. And we all know that, kids, it could be something that involves dance and movement and more kind of the body, and then other people are more the science, the analytical, the maths, or the engineering, or the art, the music, and so it's almost that the hints and tips that they're there. And if you're lucky enough to have open, curious parents that kind of help you tune into that. I know that there are so many people and cultures that it's like, no, the logic outweighs the, let's not do the inner piece of asking you what you really want. Let's find the thing that's going to give you the safety and security and the successful path. When actually the success is purely really what you enjoy doing, And that's where I think we see a lot of people pivot from. You mentioned earlier that obviously you weren't in New York anymore, and obviously your job was there. But can you speak to that in terms of, obviously your focus was different, your priority was different, but when you considered going back into that kind of work, what were your thoughts around that?
It was interesting because I loved what I did before, but I knew it wasn't now. That time was no longer there, meaning I just knew there was more to me than that. Not that that wasn't right and that wasn't good, like in and of itself, but I knew I wanted to express myself differently. Because I was aware of what I love doing the most, and that is deep conversations. And so for me, it was getting clear on that, and also not kind of going like, well, that's the easy way. If I just go back to that, then that's just the easy way. Now, I've looked at my life often. I have a tendency to choose the less traveled road, and that brings with itself difficulties. But it shapes. I mean, I think it's Brene Brown that has this beautiful, again, metaphor that she's, using, saying, there's the big path, and then there's like the bushes, and you have to sort of go through that, and you like things are going to get ripped up, but when you come through and you created your own path and you get to the clearing, and who you will meet on that clearing will be incredible. But in that thickest, you're on your own. There's no path. And there's sometimes that sense of like, well, how do I've never been on a path that has not been shown to me. And so it's that figuring that out, that path that's uncertain, and until we come through to that clearing, that when we kind of made it through that and go, oh, and we meet these other people who also have gone, that was rough, wasn't it? But here we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the pathless path. Yes. Isn't it? And knowing that's where the magic is, back to the river analogy of actually, it isn't laid ahead for you, and it's for you to find your own way. And it's the hero's journey. It's the call to adventure. It's time to change. And you either go for the pathway that is known, the pathway that other people have tread, the pathway that is certain, predictable, safe. But if that doesn't light a fire within you and you're doing it just from safety, that kind of comes from a fear place. I'm kind of remembering, I think it was a Nelson Mandela quote of, may your dreams, mirror your desires and hopes, not your fears. And I think a lot of the time we don't give ourselves permission to kind of go, well, actually, this path, the certainty one, it makes sense, but actually there's no substance there. I know where that path leads, or I can predict where that path leads. This other path, I have no clue where it leads, but it's calling me. Yeah. And I think that's the juxtaposition, isn't it, of kind of what you're going to go for.
Yeah, and what comes up for me here is also this difference between owner and victim. And we don't like that word victim. And so let's not get hung up on the word itself, but this thing of like, am I owning where I am and what is happening to my life? Is a very different position than like, well, it's just how it is and I can't really do anything. And, like, yeah, I can do this, what I love, but how is that going to sustain me at all? And we can have a bazillion reasons not to step into the unknown, but be an owner and be accountable for what we are doing with our lives. That takes courage. That brings out the biggest values in our lives. And it's leaning really into that. and that it can really feel uncomfortable, because it's easier to say, what am I going to do? It just is, versus, all right, what am I going to do? This situation is challenging. What am I going to do now? And that's a very different approach in life. And so even now, it's often like, am I the owner of what my life will be like? And so that means, yes, I will have fears. Fears will never go away. It's an illusion to think that the fears are not there. But am I willing to step into it despite the fear and see what happens? Versus going, whew, I'm scared, and I don't dare even step in it.
No, I think it's a powerful reminder, isn't it, to not fall into the thing of, what comes up for me as you describe it is almost, you either trust in yourself or you don't trust yourself. You either trust in life or you don't trust in life. And I think that, again, evokes a lot of kind of spiritual or like religious connotations in faith in yourself, or faith in something that's greater than you. But it's almost that thing of, I think us as humans love something to hold on to. And, it's funny, one of my, when I went through my coach training, one of my aspirational values was freedom. But what I've learned since then is freedom, it feels great some days, but it feels absolutely terrifying other days, because freedom can mean it's a wide open space and you have infinite choice. So you've got this blank canvas. And again, it's back to, there's another opportunity for us to go back inside and think, okay, what are the questions I'm going to ask myself to kind of come back into, well, what am I going to paint on this canvas? What marks am I going to choose? What questions am I going to ask myself to start to gather those ingredients to then navigate my next step? I'm curious, from obviously all of I asked the same 3 questions to all of my guests, which we talked about. When you reflect now on the transition that you've been through over the last few years, what would you say are the main things that you've learned about yourself, or kind of learned about transition and change?
I mean, maybe it's too simple in some ways, but is that comfort in the discomfort. And looking at that and just going, hang in there, hang in that discomfort, because that will bring the fruit that you actually want. And in that discomfort, there's fear, there's uncertainty, there's not knowing, and there's also that freedom. It's the bushes, like the side of the road. It's this, it's this meandering, but holding on. And I think that process has taught me that, and continues to teach me that. It's hanging on, or hanging in that discomfort, allows me then to sort of slowly move forward where it needs to go. And I like what you said before with this trust. That too is a process. And we want so quickly, oh, now I trust, click. No, it just doesn't. There are concepts in our lives that are here to teach us again and again and again and again and again. It's an illusion to think that we're just done with certain things, because as I evolve, now I'm on a different level, and then evolve again. So how I was comfortable with discomfort before is completely different from how it is now. And so it's leaning into that again and again of like, okay, what does trusting myself mean? Even trusting what, perhaps even, what does that feel like? Again, not what I think, but like, what does it feel like? When do I know that this is stepping into this deeper trust? And so, it's It's as simple as that. Learn to be in the discomfort. And in that also, it will work out. I could have chosen maybe something else and it would have worked out. And, is all shiny and dandy now? No, but that's okay too. I think it's also realizing that when we make a choice at transition, it's not like, which one is it? Because this one is going to be right. No, you have many choices, but you go towards one and you start moving forward on that path.
Yeah.
And then there's a room to change as well at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost that the way in which we see the world, it's either right, wrong, good, bad. And I think it's back to education, pass, fail, and it's just not how life is. It sets you up to think at things very logically in a linear fashion. And actually it's to embrace the mess, to embrace the fact that actually there's going to be voids of not knowing. And that's where, again, the magic happens. So I think people watching or listening might say, well, okay, I get it. Okay, so being uncomfortable with being being comfortable with being uncomfortable. What did that look like for you of actually being in that discomfort? What did that, because people might be thinking, all right, no, but how do I do that?
Well, they're probably all going, yeah, isn't that nice? And yeah, what does it look like? Very messy in that. In what I mean by that is like, it's that how question. How do I do that? How do I do that? And that's the messy part. And it's when I realize that it's not the how. It's just simply not the how that's like gonna solve my problem. It is who I am being and what I want to create is going to make clear how the how is going to be about. So again, with this who, like, who am I? What is trust? Where do I, who am I deeply inside? And what do I want to create? Again, this freedom. I have the freedom to create something. So I say this all the time when people are like, how do I do that? Like, that you will figure out. But who are you right now? Are you fearful? Are you dodging what needs to be looked at? Are you running away from something that's pulling you? Or are you leaning in? Are you open? And then what do you want to create? What kind of life do you want to create? And it might not be clear. Like some people have the ability to see, long-term visions. I'm not one of those. I'm an executor. I'm really good at the next step. So for me, it was like, okay, I don't, people were talking about visions, 5-10 years, what do you want to be? No, it wasn't for me like that at all. It was like, I could barely see beyond the next step, is that who I want to be in the next step and who do I want to be in the next? Which is this concept also of intention versus commitment that comes up for me again and again. It's like we have this intention of like, well, I intend to be open. I tend to be trusting myself. But how do I commit myself to doing these things, right? If I want to be courageous, well, how do I commit myself to being courageous? So when something comes that asks for my courage, am I going to pick courage or am I not? And do I hold myself to that? Because that's going to bring progress. So when we're looking at the how, or not the how, but the who, am I just intending to change something? Or am I committing myself to figuring out who I am and what do I want to create? And then I can see the how. It'll come step by step. Might not see, some people might see the whole vision. A lot of us, no, and that's okay. So yeah, it's not in the how, but that's what we want to hang on to. So
just tell me how.
Tell me. I can't tell anybody how, because my how is not your how.
No, exactly. It's so unique to each of us. I think what came up for me when you explained that was it's the ownership piece, isn't it? Because I think when we're in avoidance, it's almost this inner child of wanting like our parent just to tell us what to do. Because if somebody else just tells us what to do, then I'll just follow it. As opposed to, no, well, the real work is to do the inner sitting in. And I I'll add an analogy that's helped me navigate being in the void of not knowing, where I have used things like meditation and breath work just to kind of get back in my body again, because you can catastrophize and go off and crystal ball and, make up loads of stuff that isn't actually real. So, and this is more recent actually that I've come back to this. It's a practice that I've learned that helps me, which is when you are feeling those uncomfortable thoughts, uncomfortable feelings, etc., finding space to allow them and know that actually you are the observer of them. They aren't you. Because I think sometimes we get so entangled and enmeshed in this discomfort. We think we are the discomfort.
Yeah.
And so I often say to myself, and I've shared it tons of times with a lot of my clients in breathwork, but also my coaching clients, which is, right, you've got the whole sky. Imagine that you are the whole sky.
Mm-hmm.
And these discomfort pieces are passing weather.
Yeah.
And they come in and then they go out again. And you're observing them.
Yeah.
You're observing them being here and then going again.
Yeah.
So that, if that helps anyone listening or watching, they kind of go, all right, I think I can get hold of that. But half of it is just a very visceral experiencing of, it's okay that I feel uncomfortable. Yeah. It's okay that I can accept that in this moment I feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And it will pass and it will move through, and you're not going to distract yourself out of it.
Yeah. 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 And what if it's okay, this discomfort? And we associate it with it not being okay. And I love with the clouds, I think it was Michael Neal that uses this beautiful, again, metaphor of a train of thought, right? It's almost like a train. And it's like, it goes like you hop on this train with this train of thought, and at some point you're going to realize this might not be the direction I want to go.
Yeah.
And guess what? You can just get off.
Yeah.
And get on a different train.
Yeah.
Because we so often we just ride it all the way to its final destination with all, like may as well take it to the end. No, we don't.
Yeah.
If there are thoughts of I feel, all this discomfort that brings this fear, it's like, wait a second, what if this is actually a chance for me to grow? It's a different train. Well, let's go on that one. See if that feels a little bit better,
yeah.
and see what's happening here, instead of sort of feeling lost in this,
No, I love that. It's a very visceral getting on.
Yeah.
And riding the train. I wrote down destination catastrophe.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
So, yeah. And knowing that you can get off the train of thought whenever you want. Yeah. And that is a choice.
Yeah.
For you, when you look back and you think, right, okay, I've learned that actually the power is in the discomfort, and actually maybe it's not that uncomfortable after all. Maybe there's real gold in the discomfort. Or the message is in the mess, right?
Yeah.
What do you feel now, reflecting on it, that it's strengthened in you?
This ability to check in with myself. I used to have a tendency, when the discomfort came or the fear came of not knowing, that then I would distract myself. I wouldn't call it distraction. It was just like, well, okay, I don't know what to do. Let me write this email. It's still here. Okay, then I do this. It's still here. And I learned over time of no. Sit down, close my eyes, and start paying attention and actually asking myself some of these questions, like, what's going on here? And it showed me so often that just taking a few minutes, because we think, oh, now I have to meditate for an hour. No, you don't. It's usually very quick and very short of what's happening. And it can completely regulate you again. And you can go back to your task. You don't have to have it all figured out. But it strengthened me to know I have access to this feeling and this connection if I want to. that's amazing. And we all have it.
Yeah. So it's no force. That's what I'm hearing. It's the allowing. It sounds counterintuitive, and especially I feel like we're shifting now in the world, but it's almost like this push, 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 push. Actually, it's okay every now and again just to stop, be curious, let it be, and just, yeah, like take the other route. With that, then, to kind of round it off beautifully, if it's really taught you how to kind of sit in that discomfort, and the strength in that is to allow it, is to go there, is to sit in it, and to have that shift happen just by pausing and just being that self-inquiry. How has all of that influenced how you show up today? How's that influenced your life now?
I'm much more grounded. Much more grounded. Much more wise too. Because there's, for this inside out shaped me, it just, everything sort of calms down. And I'm able to see things from a much more grounded standpoint. That doesn't mean that it doesn't shake sometimes around me, not at all. But I know where I can get back to. And then it's okay again. And sometimes I don't. And then I realize, oh, well, that's what happens when you don't. Right? Yeah. But it's knowing that I can go back to this space of checking in with myself. What does my body need? What does my soul need? What is being communicated to me if I listen? We all have that, whether we want to listen to it or not is a different story. But this sense of like, what is needed here for me? What fills it again? What calms it? What is going to make that fear dissipate? Where am I going to see clearly through this? Because all those emotions, I mean, it's our thoughts that create our feelings, that create our behavior. And if I'm clear on that, then it's, again, going back, like knowing that that thought can be a different thought. And then how do I behave accordingly through that? So it's, that's what it influenced me again, and how it shows up. I'm just much more grounded. And I can see it sort of like what you said, like this observing a lot more of like, that's what's happening. Okay.
Yeah, it's no surprise, isn't it? I remember for the longest time, like even my parents can like take a step back. It's just like, let's just see the bigger picture for the second, because I think you can get so in the middle of it, so over-identified with the noise, with the shoving, with the inner critic, the, you know, and the intuition then is so quiet. That sometimes we have to be quiet to tune in and listen. And I think if we're constantly distractible, then that's where we get stuck in the doing, right? So I love what you said. It's almost like this grounding. What I heard as well is almost you coming back into balance again, almost. That kind of, obviously we're off kilter, but then you checking in with yourself can actually momentarily, if nothing else, come back to a place of balance. Would you say?
Yeah. And where you were talking, I was thinking when you said like it's so quiet, it is. And I've also learned, I had a recent experience where something was asked of me, and I got the sense of like, it's too much. And I kind of was sort of checking in with me, but considering yes, no, you know, and it was this quiet sense that it was like telling me it was not the right thing. And the more I allowed that to be, the louder it became. And it's almost like it became so clear that that was right, that the boundary that I needed to set for myself, that's exactly what needed to happen. And so it's this quiet voice that also can get really loud and very, very, very clear. Sometimes, you know, somebody that might be listening is like, oh, great, well, how can I even hear that, right? If it's so quiet, goodness, right? But it becomes louder if I just kind of step into it and go like, okay, what do I need here?
Mm.
Why do I feel a disconnected something? What's going on?
Mm. 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 And I think it's an important point to make, isn't it, that each of us is different, and this is part of the journey, is to learn, okay, I now know myself at a deeper level because of the self-inquiry. Then when you do start to take leaps of faith on the pathless path, that actually what you do is then learn, like, and then suddenly there's a part of you that goes, I know this feeling.
Yeah.
Or I know when I'm lying to myself.
Yes.
So it's this game we play, and hey, that's what makes life so entertaining, if nothing else.
Yeah, and it's like, and your voice is different than mine, right? Your
Yeah.
knowing is gonna like sound very different than mine.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty, right? There's no prescribed way of
No, exactly.
just
Yeah. And that's the beauty of coaching, right? Is that you have someone to hold that space for you, asking the questions and then mirroring back. This is what I'm hearing. Is this right? Is this landing?
Yeah.
And that's where the aha moments come from, of like, which is so powerful to see, like, you know, for both coach and coachee. So to round it all off beautifully, if people needed or would love to connect with you, Anita, how might they do that?
The best way is probably through my website, because then they can contact me there directly, which is www.Anita Joos Eyre. And maybe you'll link it somewhere, because the spelling, you know, between Swiss and English and everything. But yeah, that's the best way to contact me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your transition change story and so much of your personal journey. I just know that so many people would have got so many golden nuggets from that. So thank you so much, Anita.
Well, thank you, Christina. It was such a delight to have the second round of the recording, and everything went well. And yeah, I'm grateful to have this opportunity to say these things, because we can hear ourselves in other people and see what is possible, and not think, oh, it's just us, because it just isn't. It's all of us. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.